We'll be giving out the information about that at the end of the program. But today I want to turn over to Mark chapter 11, and I use this passage often, but to me this is a great illustration of how God gave us authority and power. And this is where Jesus, the last week of his earthly ministry here on the earth, he was going into Jerusalem with his disciples, and it says in Mark chapter 11, verse 12, and on the morrow when they were come from Bethany, he was hungry. Speaking of he is Jesus, was hungry, and seeing a fig tree afar off, having leaves, he came if haply he might find anything thereon. When he came to it, he found nothing but leaves, for the time of figs was not yet. Did you know in Israel, fig trees produce figs before they produce leaves? So it wasn't time for figs yet, but it wasn't time for leaves yet either. This tree was professing something that it didn't have. It was a hypocrite. It was a pervert. God is the one who made this tree. He told it how to function, and it was functioning contrary to the way He created it to operate. So He was well within His authority as creator to curse this fig tree. And when He saw that it was professing it had figs by having leaves, but it didn't have them, it says in verse 14, Jesus answered and said unto it, the it it's talking about is the fig tree, and here's what He said. He said, no man eat fruit of thee hereafter forever. And His disciples heard it. This is amazing. And the next day, it's apparent that they walked back to where they were staying the same way. They were staying in the same place. It's possible that they might have gone some different way, but probably they walked by, and yet the fig tree didn't look any changed. It didn't look changed at all after that day. He went into the temple, and this is the second time He cast the money changers out of the temple and overthrew their tables, and then they went back by that same fig tree. And then the next day, as they were coming back into Jerusalem, it says, and in the morning as they passed by, they saw the fig tree dried up from the roots. Boy, there's a whole message in this. I'm just going to mention it. I don't have time to preach on it, but the Lord spoke to that fig tree, cursed it, told it to die, and no man would ever eat of you. And nothing happened immediately that was visible, but the next day, the fig tree was dried up from the roots. What this means is the moment Jesus spoke, it was a done deal. But it happened in the roots first, and it wasn't visible. You can't see below the surface. You couldn't see what the roots looked like. It took 24 hours for what Jesus had spoken to manifest above the ground. And that is a perfect illustration of that many times we speak and command sickness to go and infections to die and things like this. And you may not see or feel anything immediately, but within a short period of time it happened. It was cursed at the roots, and it's just a matter of time until what has happened in the spiritual realm comes into the physical realm. What happened in the unseen realm below the surface is manifest above the surface. So there's a great message in that. But it says in the next verse, in verse 21, and Peter calling to remembrance saith unto him, Master, behold, the fig tree which you cursed is withered away. And I often say this, but we don't hear the inflection of his voice. It wasn't like he just said, Master, the fig tree that you cursed is withered away. It was more like, Master, look at this fig tree. He was shocked because Jesus hadn't touched the fig tree. He didn't pour salt on it. He didn't chop it down. He didn't do anything except speak to it. Peter was overwhelmed with the power of words. And he was shocked. And it says, Jesus answered and said unto them, have faith in God. We also can't hear His inflection of His voice, but I can guarantee you, He didn't just go, have faith in God. No, it was more like, have faith in God. You know, there's a reason that these guys were called disciples. Man, they had been with Him 3.5 years by this time, and they still hadn't got it. They were still shocked to see the power that was in His words. And so Jesus said, have faith in God. And then in verse 23, He says, for verily, the word verily means truthfully, truly. Anything Jesus said was the truth. But when He had to start what He was saying by saying, now this is the truth, It's because what he was going to say was so astounding, it was so amazing that people might think surely he couldn't mean what he said. So he just assures them, I'm telling you the truth. This is a completely truthful statement that whosoever will say unto this mountain, be thou removed and be thou cast into the sea, and shall not doubt in his heart, but shall believe that those things which he saith shall come to pass, he shall have whatsoever he saith. Now there's a lot in this, and the very next teaching that I'm going to get into, talking about these 20 revelations, is how that faith is voice activated. And I'll come back to these very verses, and I'll make a different point from these very verses about how you release your faith by speaking to things. But what I really want to point out today from this verse, the Lord said, whosoever will say to this mountain, be thou removed, be thou cast into the sea, and shall not doubt in his heart, but shall believe that those things which he saith shall come to pass, he shall have whatsoever he says. Notice that he didn't say, whoever will pray to God and ask God to do this, God will do it for you. That's not what he said. He said, whoever will speak to the mountain, not talk to God about this mountain, but talk to your mountain about God. A mountain here is just symbolic of whatever it is that you're wanting to be removed out of your way. And he said, whoever will speak to these problems, talk to the problems. Don't talk to God about your problem, but talk to your problem about God. You know, hidden in this, if you'll stop and think about it, you can see this. But this means that you have to understand you have authority. Instead of you going to God and saying, oh God, I've got this problem. I've got this mountain of a problem. Would you please do something? No, God told you to take the authority that you have and you speak to the mountain. Don't pray to Him. Don't ask Him to do it. He's already given you the power and authority. You do it. Man, this is powerful. Again, I encourage you to get these materials because I could minister on this for a couple of weeks. I'm just saying some things quickly, and you need to really get hold of this because this is powerful. You know, let me use another illustration. Just for time's sake, I'm going to just summarize this. But Moses, when the Lord called him at the burning bush, He told him, what's in your hand? And Moses said, a rod. It was just a stick. It was Moses' stick. And He says, cast it down on the ground. And when he threw it on the ground, this stick became a serpent, and Moses fled from before it. The Lord called him back, and He says, now take it up by the tail. And I hadn't got time to go into the whole thing, but 40 years before, Moses knew that God had called him to bring deliverance to the Jews. That's what it says in Acts chapter 7. And he knew what God's will for him was, but he assumed that God was going to use his natural position, his natural might and power to get it done. And he went and killed an Egyptian thinking that his brethren, the Jews, would have understood how that God would deliver him by his hand, but they understood not. That's what it says in Acts chapter 7. And so Moses had to flee from Egypt and spent 40 years in the wilderness. Now here he is after those 40 years, and he had been saying during this time, God, give me another chance. That's what it says in Hebrews chapter 11. He endured as seeing Him who is invisible. The word endure doesn't mean that he was running from God, trying to forget God, as that movie, The Ten Commandments, portrays it. No, he was seeking God. And he was hoping for another chance. And I believe he was saying, God, I'll do anything. I'll do it your way this time. I won't do it my way. I won't lean unto my own understanding. And so here he was, after 40 years in Bush University, God's given him his final exam. And he's saying, will you do anything? Anything. God says, throw your rod down. It becomes a snake. And then He says, now pick it up by the tail. And did you know if you pick up a snake by the tail, you don't have any control over that snake. That snake can turn and bite you. From Moses' perspective, he hadn't read